Hello Internet, my name is Corey. I've been getting a ton of messages on Instagram, Reddit, Flickr, rest in peace, about how I go about scanning medium format film. A lot of the questions I'm getting is how do you get those film borders in there? How do you edit colors, saturation, dust, etc. I'm hoping this short-ish video will kind of walk you through my personal process and hopefully it helps you out in the long run too. After about 5 years of constantly editing and scanning work, I've kind of got myself into a workflow. So firstly, open up the Epson Scan software. The first thing that's going to pop up on the left side is going to be the Epson Scan menu. Firstly, go up to mode, change it to professional. Get out of that home office mode. That's crap. You want to be able to adjust way more settings. It's going to give you way more accessibility. Secondly, make sure this is selected on film. You don't really care about the reflective side because you're not scanning a document. Most importantly as well, make sure you have the correct film type selected. If you're scanning color negative film, make sure you select color. Black and white, positive is also considered slide film. For me personally, I always stick with 48 depth, more the merrier, right? If you're shooting grayscale or black and white, I also stick to 16-bit, again, more the merrier. I always keep the resolution at 1200 dpi. On this scanner, you can go all the way up to 12,800 or as low as 50. Personally, I keep it at 1200 just for the sake of size. Another thing that I don't touch is the document size itself. I always keep that by default. Next on the list is going to be the Unsharp Mask. I have it selected just as a medium. That gives back a little bit more of the detail and sharpness in the actual picture itself. I keep all these unchecked: backlight correction, color restoration, grain reduction. Keep those all unchecked. Next thing that you want to check though, the most important thing hands down, digital ICE technology. This is going to be a lifesaver. Basically what this does is going to mask the photo and it's going to take out all those pesky dust specks, hair that's fallen into the negative, stuff that you don't want. Take the time to click that button. It's going to get as much as it possibly can, but there's always going to be some left over. That's where post-processing comes in. So after you press the preview button, a whole nother window is going to pop up on the right hand side. Since I lay the negative directly onto the scanner itself, it's trying to search for the film holder. It's trying to give itself some sort of reference. So this dialog is going to pop up saying cannot find document. That's totally fine. You're going to click close and then this is going to pop up right here. This is going to be the negative right out of the actual scanner itself. First thing I do, since the one that I personally am going to choose is this middle one, let's say, I'm going to go in, make sure that my zoom tool is selected, highlight the area that I want. And just by doing that, it's going to automatically change the settings to what the scanner thinks is the best. It's way too tiny. So I'm going to go back up to zoom and click zoom, and it's going to rescan the image, giving me a bigger preview of that negative. And voila, it's done. Well, it's a little bit bigger, I should say. So the next thing you'll notice is that the sky itself is just a little bit blown out. Obviously, I didn't do a very good job at metering this. So one of the first things I do, just by looking at it exactly how it is, I try to get the marquee tool as close to the negative as possible. That just saves me time in the long run of having to edit this. Make sure you change that marquee box before you change any of the settings. That's a big learning process that I found out after editing all of these photos. And then if you move the box ever so slightly, it will erase your settings. So moving over here to the curve section, I click on that. This dialog is going to pop up. Basically what this is your simple histogram. Your red, your green, and your blue, and then your overall black and your whites. Personally, because this is just an ever so slightly brighter than I want, I'm going to turn those shadows down. That's going to bring in that sky just a little bit more, but more importantly, bring back some of the detail. I don't want to go too much because that's going to make it too dark. I don't want to go too light because then the mountains are gone. Right before the curve starts is kind of where I start my shadows. Or sorry, the highlights in this perspective. The mids are also going to be a little bit tricky to play around with because this scene is very highlights in the top and shadows in the bottom. One of the biggest things that I'll do is just kind of keep this right on the nick of the highlight detail. You can see the detail ever so starting to pop up on the histogram. The shadows I'll actually bring up a little bit. I try to get it as close as I possibly can within the Epson software before I take it into Photoshop. less work for me to do. I hate editing photos. Because this has an ever so slightly little bit of green color cast to it, I'm going to go into the green channel, and then I'm going to ever so slightly bump and play around with that middle one. If I go too far right, it's going to be a purplish hue. If I take it all the way to the left, it's going to be a little bit green. It was ever so slightly green on my computer monitor, so I'm bumping it down ever so slightly. Same with the blue. It's got a little bit of blue to it. Judging by this histogram here, a lot of the details can be shifted into the highlights, again, because the mountains are being lit. So if I screw this ever so slightly to the right, it's going to bring out a little bit of that green that I just took out. But that's okay. Take and give. Reds are looking okay, but I'm still going to always kind of play around with it. You can always bump it right back to where it was. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to select close. Make sure all my settings are normal. Again, biggest thing right here, digital ice. That's hopefully going to take out this little dot speck right here, a little bit more of the dust up here, hair, whatever falls into the frame. Allowing the scanner to do that is going to save you much more time in Photoshop. You're just going to be clicking. And again, I don't want to do that. I'm going to click scan. Make sure that all my settings are kind of where they should be. I have it as a JPEG. I don't save anything bigger than that. I have a folder called 2019 Rescans. That needs to be changed. It's 2020. Besides the point, I make sure that all that looks good, and then I'm going to click OK. It's going to take about 10 minutes for that to scan. Perfect. So the Epson scan software is done finally scanning the image. The digital ice and all that takes a little bit, but again, I'm willing to wait that just because I don't want to sit here and click a bunch. Even with that being said though, you can zoom into the image here, and that white spot that I thought it was going to take out, it didn't. Simple. But before I do all that, first thing I'm going to do, I should say, duplicate the layer. By doing this, I'm going to be able to compare and contrast by turning the layer on and off, what I've edited, when I haven't edited. Another pro tip for you, clean your monitor. I spend a lot of time trying to clone out a single dust speck for it just to be a piece of dirt on my monitor. You live and you learn, right? So the next thing I like to do, firstly, is try to get it as square as possible. Sometimes that's not going to happen just because the way this is. It's a little bit wonky. That's okay though. Again, trying to get it as square as possible. Sometimes you have to zoom in because Photoshop itself is a little jankety. Let's just get it to like 0.5 if that's even possible. Keep zooming in because the more you zoom in, the easier it is. So you see though, the ends are a little bit hanging over still. That's fine. It's not going to be a perfect square. Nothing is perfect in this world. Scroll over, crop it in just a little bit. Make sure the bottom isn't too bad. Scroll over to the right, do the same for the right. If it cuts off a little bit of the 8 or the Kodak, it's okay. People are still going to know you're shooting film. Enter, boom. At least I got the borders cropped. It's pretty close to it being a square, close to the original form factor. Next thing I'm going to do, since I created that second layer down here, is stay on the background copy layer. I'm going to go up to the tried and true spot healing brush. I'm going to select the first one. This is my go-to when it comes to cloning out hair, dust, dirt, grime, what have you. Zoom into that kind of spot that you want it to be edited by clicking Command plus or minus on your Mac, Control plus or minus if you're a Windows person. Another thing, just by clicking on it, boom, samples the pixels around it and it's gone. It's that simple. You don't even know that it's there. I also like to clean up the edges as much as possible just to make sure that it looks aesthetically pleasing. I don't like having anything that's going to take away from the actual final image itself. This right here is going to be another time-consuming process. Depending on how quickly and how fast you want to get this edited, depends on how dirty and dusty your negative is going to be prior to you scanning it. Maybe this little speck right here, even though it's not anything wrong with the image, I'm still going to take it out. Bright spots of grass over here, that's going to be okay. There's another little dot. There's something in the sky a little bit. There's a big line across the top. Changing the size of the brush also will change how much sampling is going to be done, therefore how much you can edit in a shorter period of time. Another thing, just because I like to get as OCD-ish as possible, I'm always cleaning up the borders, even if no one sees this. Except now you guys are gonna zoom into my Instagram post and try to find all the stuff that I've edited. Surprisingly enough, there's a decent amount of things that are edited, but nothing from the actual final photo itself. It's mainly cleaning up all the dirt and the grime and the miscrops and etc. So overall, this image is looking pretty good. I'm surprised how well it turned out. Final critiques, you can always change the saturation. You can click on the curves to play around with it just a little bit more. Darken that kind of mid-ground up. You can really kind of bust the highlights out too. Just a little bit of playing around. Next thing, and finally, then I'm just gonna export a file, save as a JPEG. Pretty simple. Save at the highest resolution possible. Once I have it saved to my computer, pretty simple. I just airdrop it to my phone, post it to Instagram, or whatever have you. Hopefully that kind of sheds some light on how I go about scanning. This is just one of the many topics I want to cover over 2020 in this whole new video series I plan on doing. I have a ton of footage from all my travels of last year, some documentary stuff, travel stuff, location scouting, loading, film, you name it, just shooting with the Hasselblad. I've got so much of it. If this is something you enjoy, smash that subscribe button, give it a like, leave a comment on some topics that you want me to cover. If not, thank you for joining in. If so, see you next time.